Welcome back to DFC Books.
Hello again.
We are diving deep today, I mean really deep, into a true cornerstone of American drama, Arthur Miller's 1953 masterpiece, The Crucible.
It really is a monster of a play. It's one of those works that everyone thinks they know, but when you really get into the sources, you find it's so much more complex.
Exactly. It's probably one of the most frequently studied, most often performed plays in the entire canon for a reason.
It truly is. And our mission for this deep dive is to, serve as your guides through that complexity. We want to take you beyond that standard high school interpretation.
The famous political metaphor.
Right, the McCarthyism allegory.
Ah,
We want to explore the profound critical insights these texts offer. Miller himself, later in his life, even said the play was about much more than just a single historical moment.
that's right. I think I have the quote here. He saw it as the awesome evidence of the power of the inflamed human imagination, the poetry of suggestion, and, this is the key part, the tragedy of heroic resistance against a society possessed to the point of ruin.
That phrase, possessed to the point of ruin, that's everything.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to analyze the characters who are driving this possession. We'll dissect the enduring themes of, religion and power that fuel the whole tragedy and walk through the critical event of each act.
The idea is to give you a really comprehensive understanding of why this play is still so gripping and, frankly, so relevant today.
Okay, let's get into it.
So to really understand this work, our sources suggest we have to grasp these foundational pillars that Miller built his tragedy on. And that starts with the ideological environment of 1692 Salem.
Absolutely. The foundation of the fire.
When we talk about the themes in The Crucible, I think the most common mistake people make is to see it as a simple attack on faith.
Right. It's not. The first pillar is definitely religion and ideology, but Miller's so specific here. It's a critique of the abuse of these systems.
That is such a vital distinction. The whole Puritan state was founded on this deep, unwavering conviction that they were a people set apart by God.
A purified community.
Exactly, a city on a hill destined to witness to him in the world. So their legal and social systems were, they were completely inseparable from their spiritual life.
Yeah, the state was an active instrument of discipline, of coercion, of leadership over every single aspect of human behavior. There was no separation of church and state. The church was the state.
And that kind of environment creates a situation where moral honesty becomes, it becomes incredibly precarious.
It does. Miller critiques this ideological conviction, and he argues it breeds a kind of blind spiritual pride, especially when it's weaponized.
So the tragedy isn't that people had faith.
No. The tragedy is that people were being asked to call a phantom real. They were being asked to deny their own touch with reality, simply because the prevailing ideology of the system demanded it. The whole play is asking, what happens when a system built on divine certainty actively contradicts real, authentic human compassion?
And I guess the answer to that question brings us right to the second pillar, which is power and authority. And this theme is just so powerfully personified by one character in particular, Deputy Governor Danforth.
Yeah, many critics see him as an almost allegorical figure of authority itself. Older, established, strictly judicial, and theocratic. He embodies the system.
He's frightening because his power feels entirely coercive and ultimately self-justifying. He seems way less focused on seeking actual truth.
Especially as things get more and more dubious.
Right. And he's more focused on just justifying the court's existing rigid position. Once he's signed those death warrants, the trial has to proceed. It has to.
It's about maintaining judicial consistency and suppressing any dissent. His power is entirely built on this idea that challenging the court is the same thing as challenging God.
Which leads us to that chilling, non-negotiable principle of his, and we'll definitely dig into this more later, where he says, a person is either with this court or he must be counted against it. There be no road between.
That military-style logic, it just paralyzes reason and makes any kind of moderation impossible.
But the human tragedy, the real emotional core of the play, that's found in the third pillar. Love, guilt, and forgiveness.
Yes. The tension that ignites the entire play isn't political, it's domestic. It's the broken marriage between John and Elizabeth Proctor.
Strained by John's adultery with Abigail Williams, what he calls the single error of my life.
It's so fascinating how Miller makes the central conflict not just a public witch hunt, but this intensely personal drama. The play is just so moving in how it portrays the agony of this couple struggling to defend their marriage against their own inner tensions. even as these massive external forces are trying to tear them apart.
Right. The real demon haunting their house isn't some supernatural devil.
No, it's their shared inability
Yeah.
to forgive human frailty and to overcome this moral paralysis that's caused by all this guilty suffering.
And Elizabeth really serves as John's moral compass, doesn't she? Reminding him that the magistrate sits in your heart that judges you.
She does. But their journey is about flawed people. They're striving for a kind of justice that's untainted by their own personal shortcomings. They both have to reach a state of grace, which Elizabeth models later on when she admits her own part in it.
When she says, it needs a cold wife to prompt lechery.
Exactly. That suggests that the guilt and the fracture were a shared failure, not just John's single mistake.
Okay, we absolutely have to address the elephant in the room now. This play premiered in 1953.
Right at the height of the Cold War and the McCarthyite anti-communist hearings.
So the immediate widespread public reading of the Crucible was as a direct, a transparent allegory for those political persecutions.
And that reading is entirely valid. I mean, it's a huge part of the play's enduring legacy. Miller absolutely intended those parallels.
The parallels between the Salem courts forcing confessions of dealing with the devil.
And the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, forcing confessions of dealing with communism. The key similarity was that demand that the accused had to name others to prove their own innocence.
Which, in turn, justified the existence of the court itself.
Precisely.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because the sources show this interpretation was immediately met with some really complex and conflicting viewpoints.
Oh, yeah. Critics and commentators at the time argued that Miller's analogy was flawed. They claimed that dangerous, subversive communists, unlike the, mythical witches of 1692, did actually exist and posed a tangible threat to the U.S. government.
So for them, the comparison didn't hold up.
Not at all. They pointed out that Stalinists themselves had been far more brutal witch hunters in the Soviet Union than anything America was experiencing under McCarthy. So for many, equating the two was seen as deeply disingenuous or historically careless.
And there's a concrete example of this conflict, right? The case of Miller's one-time friend, Molly Kazan.
Yes. She wrote a play in 1957 called The Egghead, and it was widely seen as a direct, dramatic rebuke to the Crucible.
So what was her argument?
Kazan's play essentially took the opposing stance. She presented characters who genuinely believed in the existence of an insidious communist espionage network that was thriving in the U.S.
Okay.
And she questioned the moral purity of those who defended the accused solely on the grounds of academic or political freedom. It really highlights that the debate around the play wasn't about whether persecution was wrong, but whether Miller's choice of historical analogy was obscuring the real contemporary danger as perceived by anti-communists.
It's so much more complicated than just McCarthy bad.
Much more.
Now, shifting gears a bit, what makes the source material so insightful is how Miller wove his own deeply personal life into this highly charged political backdrop.
This is fascinating. He acknowledged that the emotional center of the play, the breakdown of the Proctor marriage, and Abigail's subsequent determination to destroy Elizabeth, was being written at the exact moment his own first marriage was, in his words, teetering.
Because of his affair with Marilyn Monroe.
Yes. The parallel is just inescapable. Proctor's anguish over his single error and his desperate need for self-forgiveness. It mirrors Miller's own emotional turmoil.
So Proctor, the sinner, has to overcome this paralyzing personal guilt to become the most forthright voice against the madness around him.
And his dramatic journey becomes a kind of roadmap for Miller himself.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, Proctor's final self-sacrificial rebellion was, by Miller's own admission, a reassurance and an inspiration for him.
Yes, the sources suggest that Proctor's final act wasn't just about the Salem injustice. It reflected Miller's own profound remorse over past political mistakes. Specifically, his earlier silence, or you could say complicity, during certain Stalinist witch hunts against his own left-wing friends.
So that reading suggests a more complex, almost selfish motivation for Proctor's martyrdom.
You can see it that way. Miller viewed Proctor's ultimate choice, tearing up that confession list, as a purely noble sacrifice for the community and more as an apology for sins past.
So by refusing to compromise his name, Proctor gains his soul. He gains integrity through rebellion.
Right, contrasting with the easier path of choosing life at any price, which Miller felt that he or others had previously chosen politically. He's using Proctor's death to achieve a moral and spiritual redemption that he was desperately seeking in his own life.
Wow. Okay, let's move into the essential characters, starting with the deeply flawed hero whose actions really set the entire tragedy in motion, John Proctor.
John Proctor is the quintessential Miller protagonist. He's a robust farmer, he's physically strong, fiercely independent.
But spiritually compromised.
Completely. His defining act, his single error, is the adultery with Abigail, and this fatal flaw is the direct engine of the play. It's what fuels all of Abigail's subsequent vengeance.
What's so fascinating is his immediate psychological response to this in Act 1. He tries to reject it, to deny the affair, not just to others, but it seems like he's trying to deny it to himself.
Yeah, he attempts to diminish Abigail and what happened between them by calling her child and by insisting, "We never touched Abby."
That denial, while it's rooted in shame, it just inadvertently heightens the danger, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. By insisting they never touched, he's actively lying to the person he wronged and to himself. It makes the transgression seem worse and his own guilt that much harder to shake.
So the sources emphasize that Proctor's primary internal struggle isn't against the court.
No, not at first. It's against his own paralyzing sense of unworthiness. He believes he's too much of a fraud to challenge the fraud that's happening all around him.
His journey, then, is this dramatic struggle to construct a new self that's worthy of respect. He has to confront both his sin and his guilt.
And the climax of that struggle comes in Act 4, where Danforth demands he sign a confession to save his life.
It's the ultimate tragic dilemma.
It is. Danforth is asking him to condemn himself to a spiritual death by lying and allowing his name, the symbol of his integrity, to be used to justify the court's murderous actions.
And Proctor's decision to sign and then immediately tear up the confession is his heroic moment.
That's it. By choosing physical death, he gains his soul. He selects the truth of himself and his name over the lies of the persecuting authority. His decision really sets him apart from Reverend Hale.
Who ultimately compromises.
Right. Hale compromises the abstract truth by urging Proctor that life at any price is preferable. But Proctor says, in effect, that he cannot live without his name.
Next to John, of course, stands Elizabeth Proctor. And she's initially presented as this image of courageous, genuine faith. Maybe a bit morally rigid, but...
She is the magistrate in John's heart, absolutely. She holds him to a very high moral standard, and she never exploits his feelings, even while she's struggling to express her own.
But her character arc requires her to acknowledge her own flaws. John initially sees her as cold, as unforgiving.
And she later delivers that crucial confession. "I have sins of my own to count. It needs a cold wife to prompt lechery." That self-judgment is what transforms her from a moralistic judge into a participant in their shared failure.
It shows her own capacity for forgiveness and grace, for herself and for John.
Exactly. That admission is vital for their reconciliation in Act 4. But the climax of her dramatic journey happens earlier, in Act 3, during that courtroom scene.
Oh, it's an incredible scene. John has confessed his lechery to discredit Abigail, and he believes her testimony will save him because he knows she's a woman who cannot lie.
Which sets up this profound, tragic irony.
It's the moment of fatal perjury, and it's born of pure love.
She's brought in under this immense pressure and asked if her husband committed lechery with Abigail. She knows that admitting the affair will save his life, but it will destroy his reputation, his good name in the community. It would shame him for the rest of his days.
So she lies. She says he's innocent.
An act which, while breaking the law, is paradoxically motivated by honesty, love, and justice. She only thought to save his name.
And that one lie seals his fate. It validates Abigail's entire narrative.
It does. Because John had presented Elizabeth as this infallible witness, her single act of perjury provides Danforth with the concrete proof he needs to dismiss John's entire testimony. It shatters the dogmatic ideal John held of her.
But in doing so, it reveals her profound human capacity for love and autonomy.
A tragic exchange where her moral integrity is sacrificed for his reputation, only to achieve the exact opposite effect.
Let's talk about the engine of this whole thing, Abigail Williams. She is undeniably the play's central instigator.
She is. And she's driven by vengeance and this burning ambition that the sources compare to Macbeth's hubris, a desire to replace the queen, Elizabeth, connected with all this disturbing imagery of blood and destruction.
Her power is really rooted in the sexually repressed atmosphere of Puritan Salem, isn't it?
Completely. That opening scene, the dancing in the woods with Tituba, was a desperate, forbidden outlet for the girls' emergent sexuality.
They're teenagers exploding with this primeval force toward a release, as one source puts it.
And because their community denies any healthy, integrated outlet for this force, Abigail just harnesses it and weaponizes it for destruction.
Manipulation is so sophisticated and it's immediate. She makes sure the other girls are equally implicated and equally terrified of crossing her.
She warns them, don't speak of what we did beyond dancing. And she uses this threatening language that's just steeped in violence.
We see her history of violence deployed as a weapon. She tells them she witnessed Indians smash her parents' heads.
And that she herself has seen some reddish work done at night.
Mm-hmm.
And then she delivers that chilling threat that she will bring a pointy reckoning that will shudder you if they breathe a word about what really happened in the woods.
She establishes herself right from the start as this charismatic sociopath who will not hesitate to use fear, real or imagined, to control her followers.
And her performance in the courtroom during Act 3 is just stunning theater. It's maybe the most memorable instance of this weaponized imagination.
Right. When John confesses to lechery to expose her, she immediately escalates the situation beyond the scope of just sexual sin.
She moves from victim to possessed prophetess in seconds. She produces visible physiological changes, suddenly claiming to feel this immense cold, a clear signal of spiritual attack, and then she points upward,
claiming to see the yellow bird in the rafters that has come to change Mary Warren's shape.
It requires incredible focus and staging on her part. She creates ocular and tactile proof out of thin air, forcing Mary Warren to either join the hysteria or face immediate condemnation herself.
And of course, Mary Warren just collapses under the pressure.
She betrays Proctor, denouncing him as the devil's man, and that ensures his fate. Abigail's ability to turn mass hysteria into legally acceptable evidence is her greatest and most destructive weapon.
So moving to the authorities, we have to spend more time on Deputy Governor Danforth. He's the central antagonist of institutional tyranny.
He is the physical manifestation of that rigid adherence to judicial consistency that's necessary to maintain the appearance of absolute control in the Puritan state.
And what's fascinating here is that his power isn't necessarily fueled by personal malice, is it? It's more fueled by institutional survival.
I think so. He genuinely believed that if the court, which is acting in God's name, can be proven wrong, the entire structure of the state will collapse.
So that non-negotiable principle we mentioned earlier,
A person is either with this court or he must be counted against it. There be no road between.
that's the absolute foundation of his power.
It is.
Yeah.
That military-style black and white logic eliminates all nuance. It paralyzes reason, and it renders any kind of moderation treasonous. It makes any attempt to introduce evidence of fraud or corruption a direct attack on God himself.
And the sources highlight how Danforth's behavior resonates so disturbingly with historical persecutions far outside of Salem.
Yes. His coercive power, which focuses entirely on justifying the court's existing rigid position, is compared to the behavior of Gestapo interrogators, Grand Inquisitors, and of course the infamously abusive nature of the McCarthy hearings.
The comparison is apt because Danforth prioritizes justifying past actions over seeking present truth.
Exactly. Once he has already hanged people, especially respected figures like Rebecca Nurse, any doubt raised by Hale or others is seen as a direct threat to his authority. The court must proceed.
To maintain judicial consistency and the appearance of infallibility.
If those already hanged were innocent, then the entire structure is built on murder. He cannot and he will not accept that, even when he's faced with overwhelming evidence that the girls are frauds.
So this interpretation leads some critics to describe him as a Gestapo interrogator who's motivated by a lust for power and defending his authority in a rush to judgment.
He doesn't seek justice. He seeks absolute, unquestioning obedience, and his inability to change is the direct cause of the play's tragedy.
Now, in stark contrast to Danforth's rigidity, we have Reverend John Hale. He arrives in Salem as this confident, highly educated intellectual.
He's often compared to a young physician arriving with his painfully acquired armory of symptoms and allied with the best minds of Europe, eager to chain and understand the transcendent God.
He sees himself as the scientist of theology.
He does. He's determined to ascertain the whys and wherefores of the divine activity. He's not a zealot when he arrives. He's on a spiritual fact-finding mission, convinced his academic learning and his rational processes are going to solve the crisis.
He assures Mrs. Putnam so confidently, "Have no fear now. We shall find him out if he has come among us, and I mean to crush him utterly if he has shown his face."
But that's where his downfall begins. The sources note that Hale is a man who permits a beloved ideology to overwhelm the evidence of his senses.
And that's the point when the evidence of his senses should have led him to question and revise his ideology.
His intellectual arrogance blinds him, at least initially. He accepts the possibility of the devil's power without adequately scrutinizing the human sources of the accusation.
He watches Abigail's performance, he hears John's truth, and yet he allows Danforth's authority to override his own rational investigation.
And his downfall is so tragic because he's perhaps the only authority figure who is capable of change.
And by Act 4, he transforms into this alienated intellectual, quote, shocked and disoriented by the collapse of his faith in the power of rational investigation.
He recognizes that the Puritan theology he so confidently brought to the village is just inadequate for untying the knot of suspicion that's gripping the town.
So his desperate attempt to save Proctor's life, even by encouraging him to lie, it's born of complete disillusionment.
It is. He realizes that he came to the village like a bridegroom to his beloved, bearing gifts of high religion, and everything he touched with his confidence died. He delivers that heartbreaking warning to Proctor: cleave to no faith when faith brings blood.
He's essentially telling Proctor that his own intellectualized faith has failed him, and that salvation requires abandoning the very system he once believed in.
It's a total collapse of his worldview.
So every witch hunt requires easy, vulnerable targets. And the sources are really explicit that Tituba's racial difference and powerlessness make her the safest scapegoat. She's the first person accused.
Her otherness, her heritage, her low status as a slave from Barbados, it instantly marks her as someone who can be implicated without facing any strong community defense.
Tituba is essential to the play's function because her coerced confession in Act 1 provides the authorities with the blueprint for everything that follows.
Exactly. If you confess and know names, you live. If you deny, you hang. She establishes the formula that fuels the entire hysteria.
But beyond the easily scapegoated, we find the economic motivations chiefly tied to the Putnams.
Right. And Putnam's initial action stems from this profound, private grief, the loss of 7 infants, which fuels the first religious transgression.
She's driven by a desire for vengeance, for an explanation for this misfortune. So she sends her daughter Ruth to Tituba to conjure the dead,
hoping to find out which neighbor murdered her babies. This desire for personal vindication, cloaked in religious transgression, is what ignites the entire process. But her husband, Thomas Putnam, has a far more material motivation.
And this is where Giles Corey's famous interjection comes in. In court, he directly accuses Thomas Putnam, he says.
Thomas Putnam is reaching out for land. This highlights how raw economic gain was just intertwined with the hysteria.
The law dictated that when a person was condemned as a witch, they forfeited their property, which was then auctioned off.
And Corey cites that Putnam is the only one in the area with the coin to buy up these great pieces of land. It proves that vengeance and economic opportunism were just concealed beneath a veil of false piety and spiritual cleansing.
To enhance this tragic economic dimension, the sources note that Miller took a specific historical liberty regarding Giles Corey's death.
He did. Historically, Corey deeded his land to his sons-in-law before he died. Miller changed this detail, writing instead that Corey was protecting the land for his sons by refusing to confess or deny, ensuring his property couldn't be forfeited.
Which just heightens the emotional power of the father-son legacy and the family sacrifice.
It's a deliberate, dramatic choice.
All right, let's structure all these elements now by walking through the key events, the moments in each act that propel the narrative toward its inevitable, tragic conclusion.
Sounds good.
So, Act 1. What's the inciting incident, the crucial event?
It has to be the coerced confession of Tituba, which is immediately followed by Abigail and Betty joining in to name names.
And the significance there is profound. This coerced testimony creates what the sources call the orgy of false confession.
Yes, and that establishes the toxic narrative and the legal religious formula for all the persecution that follows. The panic shifts dramatically from this ambiguous internal grief over dead children and Putnam's loss to these external, identifiable demonic threats that the authorities feel they can manage.
Reverend Paris threatens Tituba with a whipping to death if she doesn't confess.
And terrified, she tells them precisely what they want to hear, that the devil is real, that he wanted her to kill Paris, and that he has already corrupted others in Salem. Abigail and the girls seize on this moment of mass hysteria.
Their naming of names sounds like the gabbling of geese.
Exactly. It proves to the authorities that the devil is indeed in Salem, and that validates their entire religious and judicial framework. Once they have names, the court has a purpose.
Okay, so Act 2. This is defined by the terror moving from the abstract public sphere right into the Proctor's home.
And the key event here is the arrest of Elizabeth Proctor,
which is triggered by Abigail's highly personalized and malicious false accusation involving that puppet.
And the significance is that this action forces John Proctor to realize the genuine, existential danger. He had spent the previous weeks believing the court's madness was localized and, irrelevant to him.
But the discovery of the needle in the poppet, mimicking the needle Abigail stuck into herself that night.
It connects his private sin, his lechery, directly and physically to the public terror.
So the arrest is his moment of recognition. It forces him to acknowledge that the court's proceedings are not about justice, but about vengeance.
Absolutely. When Cheever presents the warrant and the poppet, John's horrified response marks his full realization of the stakes, forcing him to declare, "This warrants vengeance. I'll not give my wife to vengeance."
And this event marks the point of no return.
Right. John can no longer remain silent or minimize his sin. His private guilt has been weaponized and brought into the public arena, making his subsequent fight against the court a matter of desperate necessity, no longer just a moral choice.
So Act 3 is the inevitable courtroom clash, the ultimate confrontation between integrity and tyranny.
And the key event is that sequence. John Proctor's confession to lechery in court to discredit Abigail, followed immediately by Elizabeth's perjury to save his reputation.
He sacrifices his own good name, his spiritual integrity in the community, to speak the truth and expose Abigail as a fraud. He cries out, "I have known her, sir, I have known her."
And he believes that because his wife cannot lie, her testimony will validate his devastating claim and save them both.
The significance then lies in the crushing, almost Greek irony of the situation.
It's just devastating. Elizabeth is brought in, and though her lie is entirely born of protective love and her desire to save John's name from public shame, it becomes the fatal blow.
Her single word, no.
That one word validates Abigail's entire testimony and ensures John's condemnation. The court had already built its case on the girl's supposed spiritual sight. Elizabeth's lie destroys the one piece of tangible human proof John had presented.
And Abigail immediately uses this moment, along with her spectacular performance with the yellow bird, to whip the hysteria into a frenzy.
Which forces Mary Warren to denounce Proctor and ensures his condemnation as the devil's man. The truth, born of love, is defeated by the lie, also born of love.
Which brings us to Act 4, the tragedy proper. It's set in the dampness of the jail. Hale is desperately trying to extract false confessions. What's the key event?
The key event is John Proctor's final heroic choice. He signs the confession Danforth demands, and then he defiantly tears it up, refusing to allow it to be posted on the church door.
This is his ultimate refusal to allow Danforth to use his name to validate the court's murderous actions.
He realizes that a signed lie, preserved for posterity, would not only destroy his immortal soul, but it would also desecrate the integrity of Rebecca Nurse and Martha Corey, who chose to die truthfully.
He asks that question, "How may I live without my name? I have given you my soul, leave me my name."
And by tearing that paper, he chooses to save his spiritual integrity over his physical life. It's his ultimate rebellion. He recognizes that this death is his final, necessary act of self-preservation. Preservation of the truth of himself and of others.
And the profound significance of his death, alongside the moral pillars of Rebecca Nurse and Martha Corey, is that it marks the end of the town's fervent hysteria.
It does. The townspeople spurn Abigail, who later runs away after stealing money. As Proctor, Rebecca, and Martha are hanged, the townspeople stand silently weeping. They finally recognize the profound injustice of having murdered their best citizens.
Their public, conscious sacrifice of the three morally strongest people finally forces the town to confront the catastrophic moral vacuum left by the court's actions.
And that ensures the hysteria wanes shortly thereafter.
So this deep dive really shows that Miller's The Crucible is, at its core, about this fundamental struggle between a deeply compromised personal integrity, embodied by John and Elizabeth Proctor,
and the brutal, self-justifying institutional tyranny represented by Danforth.
And the play remains so powerfully relevant because it depicts the ease and the speed with which fear, whether it's fear of the supernatural, fear of communism, fear of sexual transgression.
Only fear, really.
Right. How it can cause a society to turn against itself, to abandon rational thought, and to sacrifice its core values, all while convincing itself it is acting righteously and in the name of God or the state.
It's a timeless warning.
And this leads us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. We discussed that historical change Miller made regarding Giles Corey.
Right, where he deliberately altered the fact that Corey deeded his land to his sons-in-law, choosing instead to write that Corey was protecting the land for his sons.
To heighten the father-son emotional dynamic and the power of that legacy.
Miller, who was a consummate researcher, he knew the historical record. Yet he chose to manipulate that fact, to achieve what he saw as a greater emotional and moral truth on stage.
So this raises a compelling question for you. If a writer must distort historical fact to achieve a greater moral or emotional truth on stage, is that dramatic necessity an ethical choice? Or is it a compromise of integrity? What is the cost of artistic license when you're dealing with real human tragedy?
A great question to end on.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Arthur Miller's The Crucible.